In the heart of Kew Gardens, where the great palm house rises like a crystal cathedral, the morning of 17th June 1936 dawned with deceptive serenity. A gardener found him at 6:30. Dr. Felix Hawthorne, curator of economic botany, slumped across a bed of deadly nightshade, his lips blue, his eyes wide in eternal astonishment. In his rigid hand was clutched a single berry of Atropa belladonna. Poison for the 21, the locked garden. The morning mist clung to Kew Gardens like a widow's veil, softening the edges of the great palm house, its glass panes glinting faintly under a reluctant June sun. It was 17th June, 1936, and at precisely 6:30, a gardener's cry shattered the stillness. Dr. Felix Hawthorne, curator of economic botany, lay dead among his beloved plants, sprawled across a bed of deadly nightshade, his lips stained an unnatural blue, his eyes fixed in a stare of eternal astonishment. In his rigid right hand, a single berry of Atropa belladonna glistened, purple-black and perfect, as though plucked for a still life, rather than a death. The nearest gate to this secluded poison garden, a wrought-iron affair secured with a heavy padlock, had been locked all night, and the only key rested in the dead man's pocket. No footprints marred the dew-soaked path save Hawthorne's own, leading directly to the fatal bed. The night watchman, old Mr. Grigson, swore no soul had passed his post. Yet here was murder, undeniable, dressed in the garb of impossibility. Hercule Poirot arrived at 8 o'clock, summoned urgently by Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, who greeted him on the broad walk with the harried air of a man grappling with the inexplicable. Poirot, immaculate in his pinstriped suit, twirled his moustache, his green eyes alight with the thrill of a puzzle that offended the universe's symmetry. "Locked in from the inside, Poirot," Japp said, leading him to the scene. "Gate padlocked, key in Hawthorne's pocket, no sign of tampering. The watchman's story holds, nobody in or out. And yet, there he is, dead as a doornail, with that cursed berry in his hand." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved finger hovering above the nightshade berries, scattered like dark jewels across the soil. "Belladonna," he murmured, his accent crisp yet melodic. "The beautiful lady who kills." Dr. Hawthorne was no ignoramus. He lectured the world on her dangers, wrote 3 monographs on her alkaloids. Why, then, would such a man consume her fruit? "Suicide?" Japp ventured, though his tone betrayed his doubt. Poirot's lips curved into a faint, pitying smile. "Non, mon ami. Observe, the berry in his hand is intact, unchewed. He did not swallow it. The poison entered another way." He leaned closer, parting the dead man's collar with a delicate touch. There, almost invisible against the pallor of the neck, was a tiny puncture, no larger than a pinprick, surrounded by the faintest halo of bruising. "The sting of the serpent in Eden," Poirot said softly. "A hypodermic, perhaps, delivering pure atropine. But why stage this charade with the berry? It is a flourish, a distraction, a mind that wishes to deceive." Japp scratched his chin, his notebook flapping in the breeze. "If it's murder, Poirot, how'd the killer get in? The gate's locked, the walls are 10 feet high, topped with spikes. No ladder marks, no rope, no nothing. And Grigson's been at Kew 30 years. Swears he'd have heard a mouse sneeze." Poirot rose, dusting his gloves with a handkerchief. "The little grey cells, they begin to work. A locked garden is not a locked room, Inspector. There are other ways to enter paradise, or to leave it." He turned his gaze to the surrounding beds, where monkshood, hemlock and oleander stood in sinister ranks, their beauty a silent threat. Dr. Hawthorne was a man of science, yet also of secrets. We must discover what he guarded, and who wished to bury it with him. By noon, Poirot and Japp had adjourned to the director's office, a wood-panelled sanctuary hung with portraits of Sir Joseph Banks and other botanical luminaries. 5 persons of interest awaited, summoned from their morning routines, each wearing the strained expression of those who no suspicion hovers near. Poirot studied them with the precision of a botanist classifying specimens, noting every glance, every fidget. First was Miss Lavinia Blackwood, 34, Hawthorne's assistant, her sharp features framed by a severe bun, her eyes burning with the quiet resentment of one thrice passed over for promotion. Her salary was a pittance, yet her knowledge of toxicology rivaled her late employer's. Next, Colonel Reginald Forsyth, retired from the Indian Army, his walrus moustache bristling as he clutched a silver-headed cane. He had invested heavily in a commercial atropine venture, eye drops for society ladies, that Hawthorne had publicly condemned as dangerous. Third sat Mrs. Daphne Whitaker, a society beauty of 28, her auburn curls and emerald gown a stark contrast to the room's austerity. She was Hawthorne's secret fiancée, her fortune tied to rare orchid patents he controlled, patents now at risk with his death. Beside her slouched her younger brother Nigel Whitaker, 25, a charming wastrel whose bloodshot eyes and rumpled evening clothes spoke of gambling debts. Debts Hawthorne had refused to settle. Last was old Mr. Grigson, the night watchman, his gnarled hands twisting a cap, his rheumy eyes avoiding Poirot's. He alone held a duplicate key for emergencies, though he insisted it had been locked in the gatehouse all night. Poirot paced before them, his patent leather shoes clicking on the oak floor, his voice low yet commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, a man is dead, poisoned in a garden locked to all but himself. Yet one of you, or more, knows how this was done. Dr. Hawthorne was a man of brilliance, but also of enemies. His work touched money, love, ambition, and secrets. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover which of these proved fatal. He paused, letting the silence press against their nerves. Miss Blackwood's lips tightened. Colonel Forsyth's cane tapped once, sharply. Mrs. Whitaker's fan fluttered. Nigel stifled a yawn. Grigson stared at the floor. Tomorrow, Poirot continued, we shall meet again in the poison pavilion itself. Each of you will bring a specimen of your favourite plant. A small request, non? But the language of flowers is never silent. As the group dispersed, Japp muttered, Plants, Poirot? You think they'll confess through a bouquet? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The choice of a plant, mon ami, reveals the soul, and in their choices I shall find a thread that leads to murder. He turned toward the window, where the palm house shimmered through the mist. But there is something else. In Hawthorne's office, I found a ledger. Locked in a drawer, it records a theft. Rare seeds worth £10,000, taken from the Economic Botany Vault 3 weeks ago. The ledger names no thief, but it ends with a threat. If you persist, I shall expose you. Japp's eyebrows shot up. Expose who? Poirot spread his hands, a gesture both elegant and enigmatic. That, Inspector, is why we must return to the garden. For among the deadly nightshade, someone has left a footprint, not in earth, but in fear. He stepped toward the door, then paused, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried like a blade. And tonight, mes amis, I suggest you lock your doors, for a murderer who kills in a locked garden may not stop at one. Chapter 2. 5. Who profited? The following morning, the 18th of June, dawned sullen and overcast. as though the very sky resented the violence done beneath it. A cold wind prowled the broad walk, rattling the palm fronds inside the great glass house and sending little eddies of dust across the gravel. At 10:30, the 5 persons summoned by Hercule Poirot assembled once more in the director's oak-panelled office, this time beneath a portrait of the late Sir William Hooker, whose stern botanical gaze seemed to weigh guilt and innocence with equal severity. They stood or sat in attitudes of brittle restraint. Miss Lavinia Blackwood had exchanged yesterday's severe grey skirt for one of charcoal silk, yet the severity remained in the tight line of her mouth and the way her fingers worried the strap of a leather notebook. Colonel Reginald Forsyth, ramrod straight in a tweed shooting jacket, gripped his Malacca cane as though it were a swagger stick, and he still commanded a regiment in Peshawar. Mrs. Daphne Whitaker, exquisite in dove-grey mourning that somehow made her look more alive than ever, dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief scented faintly with gardenia. Her brother Nigel, unshaven and faintly green about the gills, nursed a silver hip flask with the devotion of a communicant. Old Mr. Grigson, the night watchman, hovered near the door, cap crushed between arthritic hands, his gaze flickering like a snared rabbit's. Poirot entered last, closing the door with a soft click that sounded in the hush like the cocking of a pistol. He placed his grey suede gloves and tightly rolled umbrella upon the table with ceremonial precision, then surveyed the room. "Bon, we are all present. Excellent. The little grey cells detest absenteeism." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Yesterday a man died in a garden that was locked. Today we shall discover why so many people wished him to die. Miss Blackwood gave a short, humourless laugh. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, must we endure melodrama? Dr. Hawthorne was universally respected. Respected!" The Colonel's moustache bristled. The fellow was a sanctimonious prig who blocked legitimate enterprise at every turn. "Reggie, please," Mrs. Whitaker murmured, though her emerald eyes glittered with something that was not grief. Poirot raised one delicate hand. "Silence, if you please. Respect is a garment worn in public. Beneath it, mesdames et messieurs, we discover the naked truth. Let us examine the motives that cluster around our victim, like bees around a particularly poisonous bloom." He moved to the fireplace and, with the air of a conjurer, produced 5 sheets of heavy cream paper from his pocket, laying them in a neat fan upon the mantel. "Exhibit A," he began, tapping the first sheet. "Miss Lavinia Blackwood, for 7 years you have laboured as Dr. Hawthorne's assistant at a salary barely sufficient to keep you in stockings. 3 times you were promised the post of assistant curator. 3 times the promotion was given to lesser men. Men, I may add, who lacked your brilliance in alkaloid chemistry. On the 3rd of May, Dr. Hawthorne wrote to the director recommending that you be dismissed for insubordination. The letter was never sent. Why?" Miss Blackwood's face blanched beneath her powder. "Because I threatened to expose his plagiarism. That is why. My research on tropane hybrids, years of it, he intended to publish under his own name at the International Botanical Congress next month." A ripple passed through the room. Nigel Whitaker gave a low whistle. "Exhibit B," Poirot continued smoothly. "Colonel Reginald Forsyth, you are the principal shareholder in British Atropine Ltd, a company that hoped to manufacture eye drops from Kew's belladonna stocks. Dr. Hawthorne's public denunciation of your product as dangerously impure cost you £200,000 on the stock exchange. On the 29th of May, you were heard to say in this very room, 'That man will ruin me if someone doesn't silence him first.' The Colonel's face turned the colour of port wine. "Damned impudence! I spoke in anger. Anger is the seedbed of murder, Colonel." Poirot's finger moved to the third sheet. "Madame Daphne Whitaker. 6 months ago you became secretly engaged to Dr. Hawthorne. Your late husband's will, however, ties your fortune to the Whitaker orchid patents. Patents which revert to the Crown if you remarry without the written consent of the co-trustee. That co-trustee was Dr. Hawthorne himself. He refused to sign. You would have been penniless within the year." Mrs. Whitaker's fan snapped shut like a gunshot. "Felix loved me. He would have relented. Love," Poirot said gently, "has driven more women to poison than hatred ever did." He turned to the fourth sheet. "Monsieur Nigel Whitaker, you owe White's, Brooks, and half a dozen lesser establishments the sum of £23,000. Dr. Hawthorne, as your future brother-in-law, had repeatedly refused to settle your obligations. On the night of the 15th, you were overheard in the bar of the Embassy Club declaring, 'If the old devil doesn't pay up soon, I'll swing for him myself.' A colourful English expression, I believe." Nigel attempted a smile that emerged as a grimace. "Debts of honour, old boy. One says things—" "Precisely," Poirot cut in. "One says things, and sometimes one does them." Finally, he lifted the fifth sheet. "And last, Mr. Grigson, you have been night watchman here for 31 years. Your wages are 12 shillings a week. Yet, in the past month, you deposited £140 in your post office savings account, in crisp £5 notes. Someone paid you to look the other way, n'est-ce pas? Or perhaps to do more than look away." Grigson's knees buckled. He clutched the back of a chair. "I never touched him, sir. I swear on my mother's grave." Poirot allowed the silence to lengthen until it became unbearable, then clapped his hands once, softly. "Excellent! We have 5 motives, each sharper than a pruning knife. Now we require opportunity." He crossed to the window and flung it open. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant roses. "Tomorrow at 3 o'clock we shall all take tea in the Poison Pavilion itself. Each of you will bring a pressed specimen of the plant you love best. A harmless request, you understand. Yet plants, like people, betray their secrets when properly questioned." Colonel Forsyth rose indignantly. "This is intolerable. I refuse to be treated as a common criminal." Poirot's smile was seraphic. "Then leave, mon colonel. But reflect, the innocent have nothing to fear from flowers. It is only the guilty who tremble at the sight of a leaf." One by one they filed out, each avoiding the other's eyes. When the door closed behind Grigson, Japp exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "Blimey, Poirot, you've got 'em all twitching like worms on a hook. But which one's the killer?" Poirot twirled his moustache, eyes gleaming. "Patience, mon ami. Observe how they scatter, each to protect their little secret. Tonight I shall search Dr. Hawthorne's private greenhouse. There is something there, something that was meant to remain hidden among the angels' trumpets and the castor oil plants." Japp frowned. "You'll need a warrant." "I have something better," Poirot said softly. "I have curiosity. And curiosity, Inspector, opens more locks than any warrant known to Scotland Yard." As twilight deepened over Kew, the wind rose to a moan among the glasshouses. In the director's office, the 5 sheets of cream paper lay upon the mantel like verdicts waiting to be pronounced. Outside, unseen by any living eye, a gloved hand snipped a single white flower from the border near the Poison Pavilion and slipped away into the darkness. Somewhere in the gardens, a second death was already being planned. Chapter 3. The language of leaves. The afternoon of the 19th of June was heavy with the scent of rain that refused to fall. Inside the Poison Pavilion, a long, low glass house reserved for the most treacherous children of Flora, the air hung thick, humid, and faintly narcotic. Rows of innocent-looking pots concealed monkshood, foxglove, jequirity beans, and the sinister beauty of the belladonna that had already claimed one life. A single skylight dripped condensation like slow tears. At precisely 3 o'clock, Hercule Poirot entered with the solemnity of a priest approaching the altar. Behind him, Inspector Japp carried a silver tea tray as though it were evidence. The 5 suspects followed in uneasy procession, each clutching a small black japanned box or a folded sheet of blotting paper. They arranged themselves around a wrought-iron table, painted the pale green of absinthe, their faces reflecting the strange underwater light. Poirot did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back, eyes brighter than the polished leaves around them. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice soft yet carrying to the furthest datura, "we are surrounded by murder in its most elegant form. Every plant here has killed, and killed beautifully. Today you will each present the plant you love best, not the prettiest, non, the one that speaks most truly to your soul. For the flower does not lie, even when its keeper does." He gestured to the table. "Place your offerings here. Then we shall drink tea together, like civilized people, while the leaves confess." An almost superstitious hush fell. One by one they obeyed. First, Miss Lavinia Blackwood stepped forward. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she opened a folded sheet of herbarium paper. Within lay a perfect specimen of aconite, Aconitum napellus, its hooded blue flowers pressed flat yet still menacing. "Monkshood," she said, voice steady but low. "Known to the ancients as the Queen of Poisons. 1 gram of the root is enough. It paralyzes the heart while the mind remains horribly aware." She met Poirot's gaze defiantly. "I chose it because it is honest. It does not pretend to be anything but lethal." Poirot inclined his head. "Honesty! How refreshing!" Colonel Forsyth was next. With military brusqueness, he produced from his breast pocket a sprig of dried oleander, Nerium oleander, its narrow leaves still faintly pink with faded blossom. "Grown in every cantonment garden in India," he barked. "1 leaf, chewed in anger or despair, and a man drops as though poleaxed. We lost 2 subalterns to it in '09, careless fools who used the leaves to light their pipes." He laid it down like a challenge. "Efficient, no fuss, a soldier's poison." Mrs. Daphne Whitaker approached with the grace of a woman walking into a ballroom rather than a chamber of death. From a Morocco leather case, she drew a single white lily, Lilium candidum, its petals pressed between sheets of tissue. "Purity," she said, smiling sweetly. "The Madonna lily. It stands for innocence, for mourning, and for funerals." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through her lower lip before the smile returned. Nigel Whitaker gave a theatrical groan, then slapped onto the table a wilted brownish sprig that might once have been green. "Hemlock," he announced with a hiccup of laughter. "Conium maculatum. Good enough for Socrates. Tastes of mouse urine, I'm told, but does the job. Numbs the legs first, then the arms, then the lungs. You watch yourself die, wide awake, rather sporting what?" He swayed, caught himself on the table edge, and grinned at Poirot as though daring contradiction. Last came old Grigson, shuffling forward with the reluctance of a man approaching the gallows. His gnarled hands were empty. I couldn't choose, sir," he mumbled. Flowers and me never got on. They're all the same to me, pretty till they ain't." Poirot's eyes narrowed to green slits. "Curious. The others bring death in exquisite form, yet the man who walks among them every night brings nothing. We shall return to that, mon vieux." He moved to the centre of the table, and, with the delicacy of a curator handling a first folio, arranged the 5 specimens, 4 deadly, 1 pure, into a perfect pentagon. Then, from his waistcoat pocket, he drew a 6th item, a single glossy berry of deadly nightshade still attached to its calyx, sealed inside a small glass tube. "This," he said, holding it to the light so the purple-black fruit glowed like a malevolent jewel, "was found in Dr. Hawthorne's dead hand, intact, uneaten. Yet he died of atropine poisoning. Why then this theatrical prop?" He placed the tube in the centre of the pentagon. The effect was immediate. Miss Blackwood's breath caught. The Colonel's knuckles whitened on his cane. Mrs. Whittaker's fan began to flutter like a trapped bird. Nigel stared as though mesmerised. Grigson took one involuntary step backward. Poirot continued, voice now barely, above a whisper, yet every word carried in the hothouse stillness. "Last night I searched Dr. Hawthorne's private greenhouse. Behind a pot of Brugmansia sanguinea, the red angel's trumpet, I discovered something most instructive." From his pocket he produced a woman's kid glove, pale grey suede, exquisitely made. Inside the cuff, embroidered in silk, were the initials DW size 6, he said, yet Mrs. Whittaker, according to her maid, wears 5.5, and observe the staining, green sap, still fresh, from the stems of Datura stramonium, Jimson weed, hallucinogenic, deadly in large dose. He laid the glove gently atop the lily. "A gift, perhaps? Or a plant, forgive me? Borrowed without permission." Mrs. Whittaker's composure cracked like thin ice. "That is not mine. Someone is trying to—" "Someone," Poirot interrupted gently, "is trying to do many things." He turned to Miss Blackwood. "And in the same greenhouse I found ashes in the stove. Ashes of botanical drawings labelled Atropa hawthorniana. A new hybrid, yes? Twice the alkaloid content of common belladonna. Your life's work, mademoiselle, which Dr. Hawthorne intended to claim as his own." Miss Blackwood's eyes blazed. "He was a thief, a plagiarist, but I did not kill him." "Perhaps not," Poirot murmured. "Yet someone did. And that someone understood the language of leaves well enough to stage a drama. The locked gate, the berry in the hand, the lips stained blue with harmless juice, while pure atropine coursed through the veins. A performance, a flourish." He stepped back, surveying the table as though it were a chessboard in the final move. "Tomorrow," he said, "we shall learn who among you speaks fluent poison. For now, drink your tea. It is China, not hemlock, though I observe that Mr. Whittaker has already helped himself to something stronger." Nigel looked down guiltily at his refilled flask. As the party broke into uneasy murmurs, Poirot caught Japp's eye and gave the tiniest nod towards the door. Outside, in the corridor, he spoke rapidly under his breath. "Observe, mon ami, the lily is the only innocent flower here. Yet it is pressed between sheets scented with gardenia, the same perfume as the glove. The monk's hood, the oleander, the hemlock, all proud declarations of murderous intent. But the man who brings nothing, he is the one who truly frightens me." Japp frowned. "Grigson? He's terrified, not terrifying." "Exactly," Poirot said. "Terror is contagious. Tonight, Inspector, you will place a man inside the poison pavilion itself, for I have the unpleasant sensation that our killer intends an encore, and this time the audience may not leave alive. As they stepped back into the humid green twilight of the glasshouse, a single drop of condensation detached itself from the roof and fell, plink, onto the deadly nightshade berry in its glass tube, rolling across the surface like a tear. Somewhere among the leaves, a shadow detached itself from the datura and slipped silently toward the exit. The second act had already begun. Chapter 4. The missing greenhouse keynight had fallen over Kew like a velvet curtain soaked in ink. The great glass houses glimmered faintly under a sickle moon, their iron ribs black against the sky, and the wind prowled the gravel paths with the soft menace of a jungle cat. At 11:30, two small figures moved between the shadowed beds, one precise and dapper despite the darkness, the other lumpish and reluctant, clutching a bull's-eye lantern whose shuttered beam flicked nervous fingers of light across the ground. Hercule Poirot had insisted on entering Dr. Hawthorne's private greenhouse alone with Inspector Japp. No constables, no rattling keys, no official warrant, only the little Belgian's unshakable conviction that secrets, like certain orchids, reveal themselves best in darkness. The greenhouse stood apart from the public houses, a modest Victorian structure half hidden behind a screen of yew. Its door was locked, but Poirot produced from his waistcoat a slender strip of celluloid, and, with two delicate movements, persuaded the lock to yield. Japp gave a low whistle of admiration and disapproval in equal measure. Inside, the air was thick, almost liquid, warm, humid, redolent of earth and something sweeter, more dangerous. Rows of benches were crowded with the aristocracy of poison. Tall datura, with trumpet flowers hanging like pale ghosts, the sinister red bracts of Brugmansia sanguinea, castor oil plants whose innocent-looking seeds concealed ricin enough to kill a regiment. Overhead, vines of Strychnos toxifera coiled like sleeping serpents. Poirot moved without hesitation, the beam of Japp's lantern following him like an obedient dog. He paused before a pot of angel's trumpets, whose flowers drooped as though exhausted by their own beauty. With gloved fingers he felt behind the heavy terracotta rim. His hand stilled. Ah, voilà! He drew forth a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside lay a woman's kid glove, pale dove-grey suede, the mate to the one he had displayed that afternoon, and wrapped carefully within it, a brass key. Japp's intake of breath was sharp. That's the duplicate to the Poison Garden gate, reported missing 4 weeks ago. Grigson swore it had vanished from the gatehouse. Precisely, Poirot murmured. And observe, this glove is stained with the sap of ricinodendran, the source of the green marks we saw earlier. Also, the scent, gardenia, faint but unmistakable. Yet Mrs. Daphne Whittaker, when I questioned her maid this afternoon, wears only fleur de rocaille and gloves of size 5.5. This glove is a full size larger. Curious, non? He slipped both glove and key into an envelope, then continued his search with the methodical patience of a watchmaker. Beneath a tray of Physostigma venenosum, the ordeal bean of West Africa, he discovered a small leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with Hawthorne's meticulous copper plate, but the final entries were hurried, almost frantic. Poirot read aloud in a voice barely above the rustle of leaves. 12th of June, N.W. again demanding money. Threatened exposure of D's earlier indiscretion if I do not pay his debts. Refused. He knows about the hybrid. 14th on June, L.B. discovered the drawings. Hysterical scene. She will ruin me if I present a Tropa Hawthorniana as mine. Must destroy evidence. 15th of June, someone has been in the greenhouse after hours. Footprints in the loam. Small, elegant, a woman's court shoe, size 6. The spare key is gone again. I dare not report it. Japp gave a low whistle. NW, that's young Whittaker. LB, Miss Blackwood, and a woman wearing size 6. Exactly, Poirot said. But the most interesting entry is the last, written yesterday morning, the day of the murder. He turned the page and held the lantern closer. 17th June, 6 a.m. If the theft of the seeds continues, I must inform the director. £10,000 worth of Cephaelis, Ipecacuanha, and Duboisier gone. Only 3 people have access to the vault keys. One of them is betraying Kew and me. Tonight, I confront. The sentence ended abruptly, the nib having torn the paper in a savage diagonal stroke. Japp exhaled slowly. He never finished it. Someone made sure he didn't. Poirot closed the notebook with reverence. Someone who knew he would be alone in the poison garden at dawn. Someone who understood exactly how much atropine is needed to kill a man in minutes, and how to disguise it as the very plant he cultivated. They were about to leave when Poirot's foot struck something metallic beneath a bench. He stooped and retrieved a tiny glass vial. Empty, its rubber stopper still in place. A faint crystalline residue clung to the inside. Pure atropine sulfate, he said, holding it to the lantern. Enough for 20 lethal doses. And observe, the label has been carefully removed, but the gum residue forms 2 letters. BAL, British Atropine Limited, our friend the Colonel's company. Japp's face was grim, so either the Colonel brought it himself, or someone wants us to think he did. Poirot slipped the file into another envelope. Both possibilities are fertile. As they stepped outside, locking the door behind them, the moon slid from behind a cloud and silvered the gravel. For a moment, the gardens seemed vast and watchful. Then Poirot stiffened. Attendez. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing the path. In the damp gravel were prints. Small, elegant, the narrow heel of a woman's court shoe, size 6, leading away from the greenhouse toward the temperate house and vanishing into the grass. Japp followed the direction of the prints. Someone was watching us. Or waiting for us, Poirot corrected softly. Come, we have stirred the nest. Now the wasps will swarm. They walked quickly along the moonlit path. At the junction near the rock garden, Poirot paused again. A single white flower lay on the ground, freshly cut. Another Madonna lily, its stem bruised where it had been wrenched rather than snipped. 2 lilies in 2 days, Poirot murmured. Someone is leaving a signature. Or a warning. Japp glanced around uneasily. You think the killer's still here? I think, Poirot said, that the killer has never left. Kew Gardens is not merely the scene of the crime, mon ami. For one of these people, it is home. A sudden gust rattled the palm fronds high above them, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird gave a single mournful cry. As they hurried toward the main gate, neither man noticed the faint scuffle of earth behind the yew hedge, nor the glint of eyes that watched them go, eyes bright with calculation and something colder than the night itself. In Dr. Hawthorne's private greenhouse, a single drop of condensation slid down the inside of a datura trumpet and fell, plink, onto the exact spot where the empty phial had lain. Somewhere in the gardens, a second key turned softly in a lock that should have remained closed forever. Chapter 5. The Colonel's War Story. The morning of the 20th of June broke cold and metallic, the sky the colour of a bayonet blade. At 11 o'clock, Hercule Poirot sat opposite Colonel Reginald Forsyth in the dim, leathery gloom of the Army and Navy Club in Pall Mall. The fire crackled with unnecessary violence. Outside, a thin rain hissed against the tall windows. The Colonel had requested this private audience, man to man, and Poirot, ever courteous, had agreed. Now the old soldier poured 2 stiff whiskies he clearly did not expect Poirot to drink. "You've been making things deuced unpleasant, Monsieur Poirot," Forsyth began, voice like gravel under boot. "I won't have my name dragged through the mud because of that sanctimonious botanist." Poirot inclined his head. "Then let us remove the mud, mon colonel. Tell me everything." Forsyth stared into the amber liquid, then spoke with the abruptness of a man ripping off a field dressing. "Mesopotamia, 1917. We were cut off near Ctesiphon. My company ran out of morphine. Men screaming with gut wounds. I remembered the local Arabs used belladonna berries to dilate the eyes of their women. I distilled the alkaloid, crude but effective. Saved 23 lives. Also blinded an entire Turkish patrol for 6 hours so we could slip away. Hawthorne found out somehow. Threatened to expose the blinding incident to the War Office unless I withdrew every penny from British atropine Lanauted. Said my eye drops were no better than chemical weapons. He drained his glass in one motion. Ruined me. Shares fell from 30 shillings to 4 pence. I'd have been bankrupt by Christmas. On the 15th, I came to Kew to beg. He laughed in my face. Said science must be pure. Pure. The man was growing a hybrid belladonna that could kill a man with 1 berry, and he dared lecture me on purity. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the night of the 16th, mon colonel. Where were you? Here. Drunk as a lord from 9 o'clock till they threw me into a cab at 3. 20 members saw me. I couldn't have walked to Piccadilly, let alone murdered a man in a locked garden. Poirot leaned forward. Alcohol, Colonel, is a marvellous creator of alibis, and sometimes of opportunities. A man may appear insensible in one place, while his accomplice acts in another. Forsyth's face purpled. Are you accusing me of hiring an assassin? I accuse no one yet, but tell me, who else knew of this Mesopotamian episode? The colonel hesitated. Only one other Englishman was there. Captain Nigel Whittaker, Daphne's brother. He was my adjutant. Decorated for it, damn him. He's been bleeding me for hush money ever since. Poirot's moustache gave the tiniest twitch of satisfaction. Back at Kew by early afternoon, Poirot found Inspector Japp waiting beside the poison pavilion, with news that turned even the Belgian's composure momentarily pale. They've arrested Miss Blackwood, Japp said grimly. Caught her at dawn burning papers in her lodgings, drawings of the hybrid belladonna, labelled Atropa Hawthorniana, half-charred but readable. And a letter in Hawthorne's handwriting. If you persist in claiming authorship, I shall have you dismissed and prosecuted. Looks black for her, Poirot. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Too black, perhaps. Come, they hurried to the small curator's cottage, where Miss Blackwood sat under guard, white-faced but defiant. I hated him, she said simply when Poirot entered. He stole 7 years of my life. That hybrid was mine. Twice the alkaloid, perfect crystalline atropine. He was going to present it in Geneva next month as his own discovery. I burned the drawings so no one could profit from my work, but I did not kill him. Poirot studied her for a long moment. Mademoiselle, the berries found beside Dr. Hawthorne were common belladonna, not your hybrid. Why would a murderer use inferior poison when a superior one was at hand? For the first time, doubt flickered across her features. Outside the window, the rain had begun in earnest, drumming on the glass roof of the poison pavilion like impatient fingers. Poirot turned to Japp. Release her, for now. Someone wishes us to believe the jealous assistant is guilty. Someone who knows exactly how a woman scorned is expected to behave. As they stepped into the downpour, a constable came running. coat flapping, face the colour of putty. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, it's old Grigson, the night watchman, found at dawn hanging from the great cedar by the temperate house. Suicide looks like. Left a note. I cannot live with what I have seen." Poirot did not break stride. Rain glittered on his hat like tiny diamonds. "Suicide?" he repeated softly. "Non, mon ami. That is the second murder. And this time, the killer has made a very great mistake." Chapter 6. The Assistant's Secret. The rain had stopped by late afternoon, leaving the gardens washed clean and treacherous underfoot. Steam rose from the glass houses like breath from living creatures. At 4:30, Hercule Poirot stood beneath the great cedar where old Grigson's body had hung only hours earlier. The rope had been cut down, the corpse removed, but the tree still seemed to sway with the memory of violence. Inspector Japp pointed to the bark. "Bowline knot, perfectly tied, sailor's knot. Grigson spent 50 years on dry land and was terrified of heights. He couldn't even climb the step-ladder to change the gatehouse bulb." Poirot's gaze travelled upward to the branch 20 feet above. "He was dead before he was strung up, mon ami. Observe, no congestion of the face, no petechiae in the eyes. Strangulation after death, to create the pretty picture of remorse." He knelt, gloved fingers brushing the grass. "And here, heel marks where the body was dragged. Small heel, elegant, size 6 again, our visitor returns." Japp swore under his breath. "Same person who left the footprints at the greenhouse last night. Précisément." They proceeded to the mortuary tent erected beside the temperate house. Grigson lay on a trestle table, pathetic in death. Poirot lifted the dead man's right hand. Bruising on the knuckles, defensive wounds. He fought his killer, and look! He parted the thin grey hair at the back of the skull. A dark contusion showed beneath. Blow with a blunt instrument. Probably the brass-bound telescope he carried on his rounds. The murderer used Grigson's own weapon against him, then hanged him to silence him forever. Japp's face was grim. Grigson knew who let the killer into the poison garden that night. He was paid to look away, then paid with his life when he grew frightened. Poirot nodded slowly. £50 in £5 notes, crisp, new, sequential numbers. I took the liberty of telegraphing the Bank of England. Those notes were issued to the Piccadilly branch of Coutts and Comger on the 14th of June. The account belongs to Mr. Nigel Whittaker." Japp whistled. "So young Whittaker bribed the watchman, killed Hawthorne, then killed Grigson to cover his tracks." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But there are pieces that do not fit. The size 6 shoe, the gardenia scent, the white lilies left like calling cards. Nigel Whittaker wears a size 10 brogue and smells of whiskey and Turkish cigarettes. We are dealing with either a very clever man who disguises himself as a woman, or with 2 killers." At that moment, a constable approached at the double. "Message from Miss Blackwood's lodgings, sir. She's gone, vanished, left a note saying she can't bear the suspicion any longer and is taking the next train to Dover." Poirot's eyes flashed. "Non! She is being lured away, or removed. Quickly, Japp, the ferry timetable." They raced to the director's office and telephoned Scotland Yard. Within minutes, the ports were alerted. Yet, even as Japp barked orders, Poirot stood motionless, staring at the 5 pressed specimens still arranged on the table from the previous day's tea. Monkshood, oleander, hemlock, the innocent lily, and the empty space where Grigson had offered nothing. He picked up the Madonna lily between thumb and forefinger. Beneath it lay a single petal that had not been there before. Fresh, dewy, deliberately placed. And on the blotting paper beneath, Someone had written in hurried pencil, "Ask Daphne why she really visited the Poison Pavilion at midnight on the 15th. Poirot's moustache quivered with sudden excitement. "The noose tightens, mon ami. Tonight we set the trap. Mrs. Daphne Whitaker will attend a private viewing of the night-flowering Sirius in the Princess of Wales Conservatory, alone. You will provide the constables. I shall provide the bait." Japp stared. "You'll use yourself as bait?" "No," Poirot said softly. "I shall use the one thing the murderer cannot resist, the truth flowering in the darkness." Outside, dusk was falling violet and swift. In the Poison Pavilion, the deadly nightshade berries seemed to grow darker, heavier, as though feeding on the secrets that multiplied around them. And somewhere in the gathering gloom, a woman's court shoe, size 6, pressed its narrow heel into the wet earth beside the cedar, once, twice, then vanished toward the river path that led to the isolated conservatory, where the night-blooming Sirius waited to open its single perfumed flower, and where Hercule Poirot waited with it. The second corpse had only been the beginning. Chapter 7. The Second Corpse. The Princess of Wales Conservatory lay dark and silent after closing hour, its great curved roof a black whaleback against the stars. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and the heavy sweetness of tropical blossoms waiting for night. At the centre, on a pedestal of its own, stood the night-flowering Sirius, Selenisirius grandiflorus, its single bud swollen and luminous, ready to burst open for one brief, perfumed hour before dawn. Hercule Poirot stood beside it in perfect stillness, a small, neat shadow among the larger shadows. Inspector Japp and 4 plainclothes men were concealed among the palms and tree ferns, revolvers drawn, breathing held. At 23 minutes past 11, the side door opened without a sound. A woman stepped through, veiled in black, gardenia perfume drifting ahead of her like an announcement. She moved with the certainty of someone who knew every inch of these glass houses by night. In her gloved hand glinted a small hypodermic syringe. She did not see Poirot until his voice cut the darkness like a scalpel. "Bonsoir, Madame Whitaker. Or should I say, good evening, Miss Blackwood." The veil was flung back. It was Daphne Whitaker, beautiful and deadly, eyes blazing in the faint starlight that filtered through the glass. "You are mistaken, monsieur," she said, voice low and venomous. "I came only to see the Sirius bloom." "With a syringe filled with pure atropine in your hand?" Poirot stepped forward. The little Belgian seemed to grow taller in the gloom. "No, madame. You came to silence the one man who could still destroy you, Hercule Poirot." Behind her, Japp's men moved in, but Poirot raised a warning hand. He wanted the confession first. "Shall I tell you how it was done?" he continued softly. "You and your brother Nigel, a perfect partnership. He, the gambler who needed money. You, the society beauty who discovered that Hawthorne intended to change his will, leaving everything to his illegitimate daughter, Lavinia Blackwood, £20,000 a year that should have been yours. Unendurable." Daphne's lips curled. "Felix was a fool. He thought he could discard me like a pressed flower." "So Nigel bribed Grigson to admit him after hours. But it was you who walked the gardens that night. Size 6 court shoes, gardenia perfume, the spare key hidden in a glove too large for your hand, so that suspicion would fall elsewhere. You who injected the atropine into the single berry, forced it between dead lips, stained them with harmless juice. A woman's touch, always the theatrical flourish." She laughed, a low musical sound that chilled the blood. "Prove it." "I already have," Poirot said. "The lilies, your signature of false innocence, the glove planted in the greenhouse, The note left beneath the pressed lily this afternoon, written in your handwriting, meant to lure me here alone. You wish to kill me before I reach the truth, then disappear on the Dover train, leaving Miss Blackwood to hang for both murders." He produced the empty atropine file from his pocket. "British atropine lilitud. Your brother obtained it through the Colonel, whom he had been blackmailing for years. And the bowline knot on poor Grigson's rope? Nigel learned it in the army, under Colonel Forsyth in Mesopotamia. Everything ties neatly, like a perfect bouquet." Daphne's face twisted. She lunged with the syringe, but Japp's men were upon her in an instant. The needle clattered to the stone floor and shattered. As the handcuffs clicked, the Sirius chose that exact moment to open. One by one, its great white petals unfurled in ghostly silence, releasing a wave of perfume so intense it was almost suffocating. For one brief minute, the entire conservatory was flooded with unearthly beauty. Poirot regarded the flower with solemn appreciation. "Magnifique," he murmured. "Even murder, madame, cannot prevent nature from keeping her appointments." Daphne Whitaker was led away still struggling, her veil trailing like a broken wing. Nigel would be arrested at the Embassy Club within the hour. The net had closed. Yet, as Poirot watched the Sirius begin to wilt even as it bloomed, its single night of glory already ending, he felt the familiar melancholy that follows every triumph. "Order is restored," he said quietly to Japp, "but 2 men are dead, and beauty itself has been used as poison." Outside, the first pale streak of dawn touched the glass roof. The gardens of Kew stirred and woke, innocent again, as though no darkness had ever walked their paths. But in the poison pavilion, the deadly nightshade still bore its glossy purple fruit, waiting patiently for the next unwary hand. Chapter 8. The Garden at Midnight. The poison pavilion at midnight was a cathedral of shadows and green glass. Moonlight poured through the roof in silver blades, striping the floor and turning every leaf into a silent witness. At the stroke of 12, Hercule Poirot entered alone, his footsteps crisp on the gravel path. Behind him, unseen, 6 constables waited among the datturas and the angels' trumpets. He had sent identical notes to all 5 surviving suspects. "Midnight, Poison Pavilion, the truth will bloom. Come alone, or the police will come for you." They came. First, Colonel Forsyth, revolver bulging in his pocket, moustache bristling with indignation. Then Miss Blackwood, pale but composed, clutching a small botany case like a shield. Mrs. Daphne Whitaker, veiled again, gardenia scent preceding her like a royal herald. Nigel Whitaker, swaying, eyes bloodshot, yet with the desperate clarity of a man who knows the game is nearly over. Last, the empty space where Grigson should have stood. Now only the memory of a hanged man. Poirot waited until the glass door closed behind the last arrival. Then he spoke, voice soft, almost tender. "Mesdames et messieurs, 2 nights ago I believed there were 2 murderers, brother and sister, greed and thwarted love, entwined like deadly vines. I was wrong, there was only one." He turned to Nigel Whitaker. "You, monsieur, are the sole author of this tragedy." Nigel laughed, a cracked, ugly sound. "Absolute rot. I was at the Embassy Club." "Until 11:31, Poirot interrupted gently. "The head waiter remembers because you asked him to call a taxi. He is colourblind, yes, but his assistant is not. You wore a green carnation that night. The waiter swore later it was red. A small mistake, but Hercule Poirot notices such things." He stepped closer. "You owed £23,000. Hawthorne was altering his will. Everything to Lavinia Blackwood, his daughter, nothing to you or your sister. You discovered the atropine file through Colonel Forsyth. whom you had blackmailed for years over Mesopotamia. You bribed Grigson with crisp new fivers from your own bank. You knew the Gardens intimately from childhood visits with Daphne. Poirot's voice grew quieter, more deadly. You waited until Hawthorne walked to the nightshade bed at dawn. He often worked before the gardeners arrived. You followed, wearing your sister's cast-off court shoes. Size 6, a little loose but sufficient. Her old glove, her gardenia scent dabbed at the wrists. You injected pure atropine into his neck then, your gambler's flourish, drilled a single berry with a hatpin, filled it with more poison, forced it between his teeth after death, crushed harmless berries on the lips for colour. You returned the duplicate key inside the glove to the greenhouse, planted footprints, scattered lilies as false innocence. A masterpiece of misdirection. Nigel's face had gone the colour of tallow. When Grigson grew frightened, you lured him to the cedar with promises of more money, struck him with his own telescope, hanged him with the bowline knot you learned in the army. You even forged the suicide note, capital letters, the way a drunk man writes when trying to appear sober. Poirot held up the intact berry in its glass tube. This berry still contains the microscopic hole. The seeds inside are split, one only. A gambler's luck that the police surgeon never thought to dissect a fruit. Nigel lunged wildly for the door. 2 constables seized him. He fought like a madman, shouting, "Daphne knew! She helped!" Mrs. Whittaker gave a small, almost pitying smile. "No, Nigel, I suspected, but I did not help. You used my shoes, my scent, my glove. You tried to hang me with you." Miss Blackwood spoke for the first time, voice trembling with rage and relief. "He came to me yesterday, offered to burn the hybrid drawings if I would give him an alibi. I refused." Colonel Forsyth simply stared. Disgust and triumph mingled. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "It is finished. The garden is locked no longer." He turned toward the moonlit ranks of poison plants. "Yet one thing remains. Dr. Hawthorne was not a saint. He stole Miss Blackwood's work, blackmailed Colonel Forsyth, toyed with Mrs. Whittaker's future. But he did not deserve to die with a berry forced between his teeth like a mockery of communion." Nigel sagged in the constable's grip, all fight gone. As they led him out, the glass door swung wide. A shaft of moonlight fell full upon the bed of deadly nightshade. For one heartbeat, the purple-black berries gleamed like 100 watching eyes. Then the door closed, and the poison pavilion was silent once more. Silent, but no longer secret. Chapter 9. The Berry That Was Not Eaten. The arrest of Nigel Whittaker should have been the final curtain. Yet Hercule Poirot was restless. At 2:30 on the morning after the midnight confrontation, he returned alone to the poison pavilion, carrying only a small leather case and a green-shaded lamp. The moon had set. The glass house was blacker than a crypt. He locked the door behind him, set the lamp on the central table, and opened the case. Inside lay the single fatal berry preserved in its glass tube, a microscope borrowed from the Kew laboratory, a packet of fine scalpels, and a pair of watchmaker's tweezers. Poirot worked in perfect silence, the only sound the soft click of brass, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze that found its way through the ventilators. He placed the berry beneath the lens, adjusted the mirror to catch the lamp's glow, and began. What he saw made even the imperturbable Belgian draw a sharp breath. The berry had been pierced by a needle no thicker than a human hair. The puncture entered at the calyx, travelled precisely to the centre, and exited again, 2 microscopic holes. Inside the hollow created by the needle, a crystalline residue glittered, pure atropine sulfate. The berry itself had been the syringe. Poirot sat back on his heels, eyes glittering brighter than the poison crystals. Mon Dieu! Not forced between the teeth after death. It was the murder weapon itself. The victim was made to bite down on his own destruction. He now understood the entire, terrible elegance of the crime. Nigel Whittaker had prepared the berry days earlier, drilled it with a hat pin under a magnifying lens, injected the lethal dose, allowed the puncture to dry almost invisibly. On the morning of the murder, he had walked openly into the poison pavilion at dawn, carrying a small picnic basket to apologize to Hawthorne with a peace offering of coffee and brandy. Hawthorne, exhausted from a sleepless night cataloguing stolen seeds, had accepted. They spoke among the nightshade beds. Nigel offered the single perfect berry as a gesture. Half joke, half challenge. Try one of your own fruits, doctor. Prove they are harmless in moderation. Hawthorne, proud, foolish, anxious to demonstrate mastery over his deadly children, had placed the berry between his teeth and bitten down. Death had been almost instantaneous. Pupils dilated to pinpricks, heart racing to frenzy, then stopping like a broken clock. Nigel caught the collapsing body, pressed more harmless berries to the lips for the blue stain, arranged the scene, locked the gate from inside with the duplicate key, and walked out through the staff door at the rear that only Kew insiders knew existed. The key was later hidden inside the oversized glove to implicate Daphne. Poirot rose and walked slowly around the nightshade bed. He knelt again, this time brushing the soil with his gloved fingers. There, almost invisible, was the faint circular impression of a picnic basket. And caught on a leaf, a single green thread from Nigel's carnation boutonniere. Everything fitted, yet one tiny asymmetry still nagged at the little Belgian's sense of order. He returned to the table, lifted the microscope lamp, and shone it full on the fatal berry once more. There, on the glossy skin, was something he had missed earlier. A fingerprint. Not Nigel's. The ridge pattern was delicate, narrow, the print of a woman's index finger, placed there when the berry was handed over. Poirot's breath came out in a long, slow sigh of comprehension and sorrow. Nigel did not act alone after all. Someone gave him the berry already prepared. Someone who knew exactly how much atropine would kill, and who had access to the laboratory still. Someone whose grief was real, because her guilt was deeper than mere complicity. He closed the case, extinguished the lamp, and stood in the total darkness of the poison pavilion, listening to the soft breathing of the plants. "Lavinia Blackwood," he whispered to the nightshade. "You are, after all, your father's daughter." Outside, the first pale stain of dawn touched the eastern sky. Somewhere a blackbird began to sing, as though the gardens themselves refused to believe that the darkest poison could grow from the purest motive of all, a daughter's love twisted into vengeance. The case was not closed, it had only entered its final, bitter bloom. Chapter 10. Order and Method Dawn, the 22nd of June. The Palm House stood golden in the first light, its glass panes blazing like a cathedral of crystal. Inside, among the soaring palms and the warm, resinous scent of the tropics, Hercule Poirot waited. Only 3 people had been summoned this time: Miss Lavinia Blackwood, Inspector Japp, and, unexpectedly, Colonel Forsyth, who had insisted on being present to see justice done properly. Lavinia entered first, pale as the orchids that clung to the tree ferns, her severe bun loosened by sleeplessness. She knew. Poirot did not waste words. "Mademoiselle, you are the daughter of Dr. Felix Hawthorne. A secret he kept even from you until 3 months ago. when he decided to acknowledge you in his new will. £20,000 a year, the hybrid belladonna named after you both, Atropa hawthorniana, and the post of curator that should always have been yours. He told you this on the 15th of June, then added that he would first present the discovery as his own at Geneva, and only afterwards give you public credit. A delay of 1 year. For a woman who had already waited 7, it was unbearable. Lavinia's voice was steady, almost wondering. He said it was for my own good, that the botanical world would never accept a woman's name on such a discovery. I begged him. He laughed, kindly he thought, and said, "Be patient, my dear." Patient, after he had stolen my life's work. Poirot held up the glass tube containing the fatal berry. You prepared this berry in the laboratory. You drilled it with a number 8 entomologist's needle, injected exactly 0.8 milligrams of pure atropine sulfate, enough to kill within 90 seconds. You sealed the punctures with a drop of gum arabic. Then you gave it to Nigel Whittaker. She did not deny it. Nigel came to me in despair. Hawthorne had discovered his gambling debts and threatened to expose him to Daphne, to cut them both from the will. Nigel begged for poison, something quick. I gave him the berry and told him exactly what to say. Try one of your own fruits, doctor. Prove they are harmless. I knew my father's pride would not let him refuse. Japp stirred uneasily. So Nigel was your weapon, not your accomplice. He thought it was his idea, Lavinia said with a faint, sad smile. Men usually do. Poirot continued, relentless. You left the lilies as a signature of innocence. You wore Daphne's cast-off shoes and glove to lay a false trail. You struck Grigson down when he guessed too much and tried to blackmail you both. You even burned your own drawings so that no one would ever profit from the hybrid. A perfect crime, except for one thing. He placed the berry beneath a small projecting lens that threw its magnified image onto a white screen against the palm trunks. The fingerprint glowed, unmistakable. Your index finger, mademoiselle. You handed the berry to Nigel yourself, here in the palm house, on the 16th. The gum was still tacky, a daughter's fingerprint on her father's death warrant. Silence fell, broken only by the drip of condensation from a towering palm. Lavinia looked up at the great glass dome, then back at Poirot. Will there be a trial? Oui, but I think the jury will understand. Patricide is the oldest story in the world, and England has always been sentimental about brilliant women driven too far. Colonel Forsyth cleared his throat awkwardly. Damned shame, he muttered. Hawthorne was a scoundrel, but she's the best botanist this place ever had. Japp snapped the handcuffs gently this time. As Lavinia was led away, she paused beside Poirot. Thank you, monsieur, she said quietly, for seeing the truth whole. Poirot bowed, a trace of sorrow in his green eyes. Truth is always whole, mademoiselle. It is we who break it into pieces. Outside, the sun rose fully, flooding Kew with light. Gardeners began their rounds. Visitors would soon arrive to admire the roses and the orchids, never knowing that beneath the beauty had grown the bitterest of all fruits. Poirot lingered a moment longer beneath the palms. He adjusted his hat, smoothed his moustache, and addressed the empty air with quiet satisfaction. And now, mes amis, the little grey cells may rest. Even in the most poisonous garden, order and method have been restored. He stepped out into the June morning, twirling his cane, while behind him the great palm house shimmered like a promise that life, for all its hidden toxins, would go on blooming.